Good evening, community. Thank you for allowing us to bring you once again the following stories. The following accounts of encounters with the paranormal, which the community itself, which you yourselves have shared with us. The objective for the next few minutes is for you to immerse yourselves completely in the following stories, to live them, to be there in the precise setting where they occur. So it's time to turn off the lights and let yourself be carried away and enter completely into the following tales of the night. Good evening, community. I've been following Tales of the Night for a year and a half, but until today I hadn't dared to share the only paranormal experience I've lived through. Even though it's a very short story and perhaps not very surprising, I get chills every time I tell it. I'm from the Dominican Republic, and I live with my family in a housing complex where the buildings are across from each other. In one of those buildings, a lady named Dorita lived. She was a very active woman for her age and used to sell sweets and trinkets that attracted children. I remember one day, near the Christmas holidays, I saw her from my bedroom window. She entered her house in a hurry. I didn't give it much importance. I thought she was simply in a rush, that she was running late. But from that moment on, I never saw her enter or leave again. Shortly after, one afternoon when I was on the balcony with my dad and my sister, I noticed several cars arrived and parked in front of the building. A group of people gathered outside Miss Dorita's apartment, and I thought it might be a family gathering, although I was surprised that she didn't come out to greet them, as she always did. I didn't think much more about it. There were about 6 or 7 people talking amongst themselves when suddenly I saw Miss Dorita leave her house with a broom and a dustpan. She walked among the people as if nothing was happening, without looking at them, and without them looking at her. Everyone was minding their own business. I saw her bend down, pick up a plastic bag from the ground, and then calmly return to her house. I thought maybe she had already greeted her visitors, and that's why she didn't pay attention to them. But it still seemed like somewhat strange behavior. 4 days later, a friend of my mom's told us that Miss Dorita had passed away almost a week earlier, and that the day we saw people in front of her apartment, they were there for a prayer ceremony in her memory. And I was in shock. I was sure I had seen her leave her house, walk among the people, and return. When I told my family what I had seen, I was surprised to learn that both my sister and my father had also seen her do the same thing. Since then, I think that in some cases, spirits can appear so real that it would never cross our minds that we are seeing someone who is no longer in this world, that we are seeing a ghost. That's my story. Maybe it's not as impactful as the ones usually shared here, I know, but I wanted to tell it to this great community. Thank you very much for reading me, and a very affectionate greeting from the Dominican Republic. Hello, community. I want to share an experience that didn't happen to me, I clarify, but was told to me by a friend very close to my family, who worked in the old psychiatric ward of the San Rafael Clinic, now known as Patio Tlalpan. Below, I'll share her story and the words she related it to me. I started working at the clinic when I was 24 years old. Currently, I'm 72. Previously, I had worked in restaurants as a waitress and in customer service. Nothing related to nursing or anything similar. This would be my first experience. I arrived there because a neighbor recommended it to me, and at that time I was going through financial difficulties. I decided to try my luck with the night position of assistant, which consisted of distributing medicines and checking inventory. Nothing complicated, really. At first, I won't lie to you, I felt a little fear, but not because of paranormal issues. In fact, I wasn't a believer in ghosts or anything supernatural. The fear was more because some patients, due to their condition, could become very aggressive. But finally, they hired me, and I wasn't in a position to reject a job out of fear. My shift was short. It started at 7 in the evening and usually ended at 11, although there were occasions when I had to cover another position and stay until 1 in the morning. I remember that in the first weeks, I heard rumors that in the place quite inhumane practices were committed with the patients. They said they were treated as if they were wild animals, without the respect they deserved as sick people. There was also talk of cases where, not having relatives to take care of them, some patients mysteriously disappeared overnight, so they wouldn't occupy one more place in the psychiatric ward. For me, all these were simple gossip, so I didn't pay too much attention to these topics. And well, nothing strange had happened to me until the 3rd week of work. One night I had to pass through a hallway that many feared. They said they felt observed there, and even told that a person quit after witnessing something in that place. Something they could never get over. I don't remember the exact time, but that night, while I was walking towards the inventory, I heard something fall to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and suddenly, I clearly felt a hand touching my head. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. I stood up in a hurry, and then I clearly felt as if someone was pulling my hair, and I heard a cold sigh in my ear. Frightened, I left everything and ran to tell a colleague what had happened to me. She, in a mocking tone, told me that some patients used to get up at night, that I shouldn't give it importance. I replied, still upset, that there was no one else when this occurred. I could tell that my comment bothered her, although she didn't say anything else. Even so, she decided to accompany me to that place. There was nothing there. Everything looked normal. But later I found out that several people had experienced the same thing in that empty hallway. From then on, fear wouldn't let me pass through there, but I couldn't stop going to work. They didn't pay me much either, but I didn't have many options to change jobs, so I simply stayed there, with the fear of every day. And indeed, how many of us have had to endure a job we can no longer stand? I remember very well on another occasion, when I was about to leave, we heard an elderly patient start screaming in a heart-wrenching manner. And this was quite concerning, as it could upset the other patients. I went with 3 other colleagues to see what was happening, and the scene we found was disturbing. The lady was in a deplorable state in her room, playing with her own fecal waste. I don't want to go into more details, but it was a vision difficult to erase. The lady was also speaking in a language, or in a tongue, I don't know, completely unknown to me. We tried to calm her down, but it was impossible. Only until other workers arrived, who seemed specialized in these types of situations. Were they able to contain her? I was very disturbed. It was something that I found extremely repugnant and macabre. When I finished my shift, a colleague accompanied me. To ease the tension, he told me he would invite me to some tacos at a stand very close to the psychiatric ward. While we were eating, he commented that he had heard rumors that in the place, there were not only sick people, but exorcisms were also practiced, and he was convinced that that lady, the lady we had just attended to, had something strange about her, that it wasn't just her madness that had her like that. Without being rude, I responded kindly that I preferred not to talk about the subject. My perception of these things had changed after my first experience, and of course, I didn't want to scare myself more. He changed the subject, and that was that. However, that night I couldn't sleep. For some reason, I also remember well that the next day I took my son to school. He was in the afternoon shift. I returned home, prepared my meal, and later picked him up to leave him with my sister. That way, he wouldn't be alone when it was time for me to go to work. While we were on the way, my son, who at that time was 6 years old, asked me a question that left me stunned. "Mom, who accompanies you when you come to pick me up?" According to him, he was referring to a very old man whom he had already seen a couple of times with me outside, just watching when I went to pick him up at his aunt's house. I clarified that when I went for him, since I was so tired, I didn't enter my sister's house. I asked him what he was talking about if I never went accompanied, but he insisted calmly that the man was just there, by my side, and stayed looking inward. What seemed strange to him is that by the time he came out, the man had disappeared. At first, concern invaded me as I thought that perhaps one of the patients was escaping from the psychiatric ward, or that something more inexplicable was happening. I feared that we could be in danger, especially if this gentleman tried to attack my son or my sister, who also had a young daughter. I started questioning everything, so I informed my superiors about what my son had told me, but they ignored me. They ignored me and said that it wasn't possible. that the sick couldn't escape. Annoyed by their lack of support and because they didn't even believe me, I returned to my work post, and it was then that a colleague approached me. She knew what had happened. She knew what I was complaining about, and told me that it was very common for things like this to happen in that place with the workers. She told me that what my son saw wasn't a person, but a restless soul that had possibly attached itself to me. She warned me that I had to be very, very careful, that it wasn't something to take lightly. Although I know she was trying to help me, I got very upset hearing that. I asked her not to tell me something like that again, and she just apologized and left. Sometime later, something happened that completely changed my way of seeing things. Something that to this day still terrifies me. With great shame, I have to admit that since then, I even had to buy special underwear because I couldn't contain the urge to go to the bathroom at night due to fear. During those days, I frequently had sleep paralysis, so I ended up going to get a cleansing with a high school friend, and even my son had to get one too. But without a doubt, the final straw was another event that made me see reality differently. After almost 4 months of work, I managed with difficulty to adapt to the conditions of the place. I learned to ignore the strange noises and uncomfortable situations that occurred with increasing frequency. Among my interactions, I sometimes talked with a patient whose clothes were so worn out that she seemed to be the one who had been there the longest. I could never see her face clearly, and I thank God for that, since the darkness in that area made it difficult to distinguish details. I only noticed that her skin seemed to be full of scabs, of dirt, that she had extremely dry lips, and her voice. Her voice is something I would prefer to forget. In fact, I think my mind has erased how it sounded, perhaps out of fear, perhaps protecting me. I can't even pronounce her name. One night while doing my usual inventory, I heard this patient behind me.
"Come. I want to show you something," she told me.
I replied that I would go as soon as I finished my tasks, but when I turned around, she was no longer there. The truth is, I didn't want to follow her, but I heard her voice calling me again.
"Over here. Come."
When I followed her, I saw that she was heading towards the basement. I told her she couldn't be there anymore and that we needed to go back, but she ignored me and opened a door that had a clear warning not to pass. At that moment, I heard what seemed like heart-wrenching screams, as if someone was being tortured in there, accompanied by profanities ordering silence. I was about to peek in, as if hypnotized by the screams, when a worker suddenly appeared. With a firm and somewhat aggressive tone, he ordered me to get out of there, to return to my post. I explained that a patient had entered, that I had lost sight of her, so I asked him to please check the place. However, he didn't listen to me and again insisted that I leave. Distressed by the patient's situation, I moved away, but I couldn't help feeling a deep uneasiness. I remembered the conversations of my colleagues and wondered if all that which seemed like simple gossip could have some truth. That night, I couldn't share what had happened with my colleagues, since for some reason a guard began to follow me discreetly. Although he tried to hide it, I noticed his movements, which only increased my paranoia. The next day, I spoke with a colleague in charge of caring for the patients, someone who knew everyone in the place. I asked her if the lady had returned safely to her dormitory. Her reaction was one of absolute astonishment. She looked at me with a frightened expression and with a broken voice as if she were on the verge of tears. She told me, "That lady passed away approximately 2 weeks ago. I don't understand what you're talking about. You're confused, right?" My disbelief mixed with panic. I described the lady to her, even mentioning the dormitory where I had seen her to make sure we were talking about the same person. My colleague quickly dispelled any possibility. It was the same person, but I couldn't have seen her because she had died 2 weeks earlier. I couldn't believe it because I not only saw her, I had talked to her. Just a week ago, I had greeted her when I was on my way to attend a specialist call. How was it possible? And I know, many have told me that it sounds completely crazy and they don't believe me. But I can swear to you that it's not my imagination, that I saw her as a real person. After this episode, I obviously decided to quit. I didn't want to have any more contact with that place, Despite the fact that some colleagues have become very close over time, I made the decision to cut all ties with that hospital. I even moved far away from there, as anomalies that I prefer not to remember began to occur in my house. My sister still lives nearby, but she is terrified of going to that plaza. When they go to the movies, they prefer to go all the way to Perisur because they don't feel comfortable in the place. My son, for his part, doesn't remember anything of what we lived through. I told him about it, but it seems as if it never happened for him, and deep down I thank God for that. Today I no longer fear the paranormal, although I have chosen not to watch horror movies. It has cost me a lot to talk about this, but I wanted to finally tell it. So thank you for your trust. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope I haven't bored you with my story. Sometimes life gives us moments so brief that they almost seem to go unnoticed, until we look back and remember the details that escaped us at that instant. The story we have just heard is a reminder that perhaps those fleeting encounters are not always simple coincidences, and perhaps as stories like the first one, that of Miss Dorita, teach us we don't need to look for the paranormal in remote places, in strange places. Sometimes the supernatural finds us right in familiar spaces, in the same neighborhood where we have lived all our lives. But don't let your guard down, community. We never know at what moment or in what form something will appear and make us protagonists of our own ghost story. Or in what form something will appear, listening so that you never miss a new story. And it is super important for us that you give us a 5-star review, or recommend it to people who you think would like this type of story, only if you really liked the episode. Thank you, because if Tales keeps growing day by day, it is solely and exclusively thanks to you. But well, we continue. There are still more stories tonight. Good evening, Uriel. I have been following your channel and listening to the tales for a few months now. I am from Panama, and I have noticed that there aren't many stories from my country, like the legends we already know around here. A few days ago, I heard one of your tales about a particular topic, and I remembered a moment that I can describe as paranormal in my house. I asked that for my story. Please don't use my name. This experience happened in 2016, when I was 15 years old. I was home alone waiting for my parents to arrive. My dad, while driving, called to let me know they were close. He asked me to go to my sister's house so we could meet there and have lunch together. My sister lives a few streets away from my house, so I thought I'd walk there. A few minutes later, I heard someone arriving. It was my mom. I greeted her, although I found it strange that she came alone because, according to the plan, both would go directly to my sister's house. I said, "Mom? You came to the house. I thought you were going to go to my sister's too." My mom didn't enter the house, but my dog greeted her happily as always. She put her umbrella on one of the windows and told me, "I'm going to check on the chickens." My parents have always raised chickens. They take care of them a lot, so I didn't think anything was strange. I thought she was just going to check if they were okay, and then we would leave. I thought that when she returned from the yard we would leave, but 10, then 20, and up to 30 minutes passed, and my mother didn't return from the chickens. I went out to see if she needed help so we could leave soon, but when I looked around, I felt a very strange pressure in my chest, a feeling of panic. There was no one in the yard. I looked towards the window and the umbrella that, I swear, it wasn't there either. I entered the house and looked for my cell phone. I called my father. "Dad, have you arrived yet?" I asked. "Yes, we just got here." "Come on over," he replied. I didn't tell him anything about what had just happened. I just took my keys, locked the house, and walked to my sister's house. As soon as I arrived, I told them what had happened. My mom looked at me somewhat amazed, but just said, "It must be my soul that arrived first." In my family, we have had several events that we cannot explain, and we firmly believe that ghosts, bad energies, demons, and all that exists. I guess that's why my mom wasn't so amazed. But when I heard that episode about doppelgangers, about evil substitutes, I remembered this experience. And for some reason, its memory caused me more fear. I hope you can narrate it, and especially know if anyone has had more interaction with one of these beings. Hello, friends of Tales of the Night. My name is Jimena, and I am originally from Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. I would like to tell you my story about the gifts that are inherited from generation to generation. My mom always told me that if I saw enough, I would invoke things, and I never believed her. I am the only great-granddaughter who got to meet my great-grandmother, a very strong woman, energetically. She was one of those old ladies who cured you of fright and swept you with chili, egg, and basil. She was the greatest protector of our house against spirits. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2016 due to a bad operation in a hospital here in Mexico. A month after her death, I began to have health problems, tachycardia. Medically, it wasn't serious, but spiritually I was told that it was because I had a dead person loading on me, taking away my strength to breathe, generating pain in my chest. I didn't know exactly what I was dealing with. Since I wasn't born with the gift, I inherited it. Over time, I got used to seeing people out of the corner of my eye who simply weren't there. My house is an old construction in the center of Ciudad Victoria, with brick and mud walls, and even a well where water is stored. Behind this old house, my family decided to build a larger, more modern house. At the beginning of 2017, my gift began to develop. I no longer just saw them. Now these people were talking to me. They wanted something from me. Although the subject didn't surprise me, I've always been very fearful. One day, in May of that year, I was lying down in the room I shared with my mom, whose door leads directly to the huge patio of the house. I clearly heard my mom shouting at me asking for help, and I ran out and asked her what had happened, but she didn't answer me. I wanted to think that she needed help hanging the clothes. The washing machine had just turned off, so I took some garments and headed towards the darkest part of the patio, where the clotheslines were. Near me, I heard the cracking of a branch, as if someone had stepped on it. Beside me was my little dog, Pato, who turned to look at the same place as me, in an alert position. I simply ignored it and continued hanging the clothes. I was in complete silence when suddenly I heard my mom's voice asking for help again. I removed the shirt I was hanging, and behind it was the face of a disfigured woman. I was so scared that I left everything and ran away while my dog barked at nothing. I entered my room desperate. I realized that my mom had always been in the bathroom inside the bedroom. She asked me what was wrong. I told her what I had heard, what I had seen. My mom was always the only one to believe me, so she went out to see who was around there. But there was no one, only the clothes that I had hung now thrown on the ground, as if someone had ripped them from the clothesline. That night we decided to go to sleep and try to forget what had happened, but once in bed around 2 a.m, the television in my deceased grandmother's empty room suddenly turned on at full volume. There was no one else in the house, just my mom, my puppies, and me that night. "Let's go," my mom told me, and I accompanied her to check, terrified. We unplugged the television, but I remember that when I turned towards a corner of the room, I saw something that I still don't understand. The remote control was floating, as if someone invisible was holding it, and as soon as I saw it, it fell on the bed, as if someone had dropped it. Obviously, we ran back to my room, and my mom lit a candle. Later, my mom tried to sleep, but I didn't have the same luck. At around 3:30, I realized that my mom had fallen into a deep sleep, but I was still there, forcing myself to close my eyes. Then, I heard something at the window, as if someone was knocking. But not wanting to wake my mother, I turned. There she was, the same disfigured woman from the patio. She was peeking through the window. I couldn't utter a single word. I stayed there, looking at her for several minutes. She didn't move, nor did I, but I knew she was looking for me. My only solution was to close my eyes tightly and begin to pray. I prayed with all my strength. I asked God to help us because I feared for my mother and for myself. I told that presence that I didn't know what she wanted, but that I couldn't help her. That night was very difficult for me. I felt like I was in an endless dream. Before I knew it, my mom was in front of me with a big candle, an egg, a chili, and basil. I realized that my body was asleep, that I couldn't move, and she was trying to wake me from that dream that was making me cry, from that dream that wouldn't let me breathe. I still can't believe that everything was a dream that almost killed me, not just from fright. My mom says I stopped breathing for a few minutes. To this day, I have never experienced anything like it again. Many people who visit my house, and to whom I tell this, say that the woman didn't want help, but wanted me. Since my grandmother's death, the house was exposed to those spirits entering, and I, as a being who has this gift, attracted them. Today, at 22 years old, I still see many things. It's almost 5 years since that event that with all my soul, I hope not to experience again, because I truly felt I was dying inside. I no longer live in that house, but in Texas. But to this date, the souls that wander this earth continue to seek me out. I simply learned to ignore them. I want to thank you for reading my anecdote, and make sure to inform yourselves so that spirits never catch you off guard, like they did me. All because of not knowing that gifts are inherited, that they can come to us at any time.